Assalamu alaikum.
وعليكم السلام.
وعليكم
I
السلام.
hope you all are well. And I'm following the space. I mean, I like it a lot. But I do have a really crucial question. I'm a bit more to the point, what will happen if we will ban United States? I mean, what are the possibilities they will implement a case fire? And I don't know, do they really care about that? Or
Was that your question?
well, let's suppose we get to the Article 6, so we will ban United States from UN. What will be the impact?
Thank you very much for your question. Brother Shahid, would you mind answering that question, or should we?
To be honest with you, I don't really find it to be a very serious question. I find it to be a very emotional and basically a sort of a despondent question. Imagining that because the United Nations hasn't been effective up until now, it can never be effective, without recognizing what has made it ineffective up until now, which is the presence and the domination of the United States. When you have all of the countries of the world working together in a consensus, in a global consensus, not being prevented by the United States, it's irrational to believe that they can do nothing. The only thing that has been preventing them from being effective up until now has been the domination of the United States. So if the United States is removed, then there won't be any obstacle to prevent the United Nations from operating effectively. I wanted to just say something kind of with regards to his question, because the question is based on how badly things have been for all of our lifetimes. As long as any of us who are online now have been alive, things have been bad. And the United States has been dominating the planet. And the United States has been, one of the ways that they've been dominating the planet is through their domination of the United Nations. So it's kind of inconceivable for us to imagine a world in which the United Nations does what it's supposed to do. I understand that. I totally understand that. And I understand why people, for example, think, rather than kicking the U.S. out of the UN, why don't we just disband the UN? Why don't all of the countries, of the world, all of the member states just resign their memberships with the UN and, start another organization or something like that? I understand this. This is a kind of a desperation and an expression of hopelessness, because we haven't seen anything up until now that gives us a reason for optimism, because we've only lived in an era in which the United States has dominated the planet. So it's hard for us to imagine that not being the case. But with regards to the UN, I would just say, and it has been said before, earlier in the space, I think, that there's nothing wrong with the United Nations on paper. There's nothing wrong with the charter on paper, the principles of the charter. There's nothing wrong with any of that. The problem with a broken promise isn't the promise. The problem with an unfulfilled contract isn't the contract. The problem is the one who's breaking the promise. The problem is the one who's failing to fulfill their contractual obligations. But if you read the United Nations Charter, it's good. And it's so good that the United States never would have agreed to sign it if they ever thought they would have to live up to it. But these people, the US, the West, the Western colonizing nations in 1945, they never thought colonization would end. They never thought that the colonized countries in the world would rise. They never thought that the global South would rise. They never thought that their own power would diminish. They thought they were going to be in control forever. So they never thought that they were going to have to be called to account for what they signed on the UN Charter. But now, all of these countries that have abused the world for decades, they have us all locked in this room. The United Nations, the General Assembly, they have us all locked in this room. And they wanted us to be locked into this room so that they could jail us, so that they could dominate us. But since 1945, we've grown, and they've weakened over the course of those decades. The power dynamics have changed in the world. So now we have the opportunity actually to take over that room. We have the opportunity to take over that organization, and we can make sure that that contract actually gets fulfilled. We can make sure that that promise comes to fruition. And the way that we can do that is by getting the the principal, the primary promise breaker out of the organization, and that's in the charter to do it. So there's not a reason to believe that this can't be done, and there's not a reason to believe that the United Nations, if it isn't being dominated by the world's biggest criminal, can't be transformed from a criminal syndicate run by the world's biggest criminal into what it is supposed to be, or what it has claimed that it was established to be. There's no reason why we can't make it that. And I think that people just have to change their perceptions. You have to recalibrate your perceptions of the United States and recalibrate your perceptions of the West, because the fact of the matter is, the reality is, and you can see it if you understand how to interpret events that are going on in the world today. You can see very clearly that the United States isn't what it used to be. They don't have the power that they used to have. And the only power that they have is your perception of their power. The only way that they can continue to control and dominate the planet is because you just think that they do. You know, it's like a slave on a plantation, and the master is in the house and he died already, but you don't know he's dead. So you think he's still in the house, but he's not there. It's an empty house, and you can leave anytime you want. It's just a matter of changing our perception.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Brother Shahid, because I was on a space last week, and they were talking about how the in Quran it says "Sahar عيون الناس," like they magically control the brain of the people to think they are useless, they cannot stand up against them. So what you said was exactly what I've came into my mind. When Suleiman passed away, peace be upon him, the jinn didn't know that the master has passed away until the ants eaten from the body, and they realized then Suleiman, peace be upon him, has passed away. So this is some sort of magic, not magic per se, though, that we know, sort of magic that has been colonizing the brain and brainwashing the people, thinking that we cannot stand against this power, the superpower of the world, or the supplier of the United Nations, or the militarily advanced country. You see what I mean? So
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
sort of, So this sort of colonization.
Exactly. At this point, the most dangerous, and this is why we talk on Middle Nation so much about decolonization, psychological decolonization, because that's really the last remnants of colonization. Because we have the ability to be liberated now. We have the practical ability to be liberated. Okay, not all at once, not overnight, but step by step, and we're moving in that direction. And the main point is, they don't have the ability to colonize us anymore. They don't have the ability to dominate us anymore. The only way that they can do it is is psychologically, is through our minds, through our mentality, through us believing that they're still what they used to be, that our memories of their power are carrying them into the future, and that they still have that power, but they don't. They're running on vapors at this point. They're running on fumes. The United States is running on fumes, and like I've talked about many, many times on the channel, people like Joe Biden. I mean, it's almost a joke to even have to say it. People like Joe Biden aren't running anything. They're not making any decisions. The man really should be in a care home. It's actually quite ruthless that they're even running him for office. He needs to just be in bed. But the owners and controllers of global financialized capital have completely captured the state, have completely captured state power in the United States, completely captured the political process, completely captured the politicians, the government, and so on. And they don't have any loyalty to what they own. The one who is owned has to be loyal to the owner, not the other way around. And so the owner, it doesn't have to be loyal to the United States. They don't have to be loyal to the government. They don't have to be loyal to the interests of the population. That's the last on their list. They're loyal to their shareholders. They're loyal to their own pockets, to their own bank accounts, to their own dividends. And if they can get more of that by partnering with the Global South and by working with BRICS, well, that's what they'll do. It doesn't matter what the U.S. wants. It doesn't matter what Joe Biden wants. It doesn't matter what Donald Trump wants. It doesn't matter what any of the politicians want or the lobbyists. We have to really understand the whole power dynamics have changed drastically over the course of the last 20 years, there's been a huge change in where the power lies. It's been an ongoing process, a transfer of power from the public sector to the private sector. That's been going on my whole lifetime. But it has accelerated rapidly over the last 20 years to where now the people who are making decisions are in the private sector. And as I've talked about many times, they're an national nation unto themselves. They float above borders. They're a supranational, super sovereign, private sector elite. And they don't care one way or another what's in the interest of the United States. They don't care one way or another what's in the interest of Europe. And you can see that by everything that's been going on in Europe, at least since the Ukraine war and even before then. So there's not a reason to believe that the United States as a nation, as a country, the way we used to think about it, as a government, has the power to do what they used to do and to pursue colonization and domination the way they used to do. So I think that it's really, really important for us to understand how the power dynamics have changed and to shake off the sort of shackles of our own memory of colonization and domination, because that's the only thing at this point that's really standing in our way, and that's really the main obstacle to us achieving our own liberation.
This is an institution that serves the United States, and when it does not serve the United States interest, what they will do is they will try to undermine it. They will try to, make sure that it serves its interest, right? And if not, they will undermine it, right? So to invoke the Article 6 and kick the U.S. out is like kicking the United Nations itself out. So I don't think I wish other countries, right, other middle powers, other rising powers could come together and create institutions like the UN, right, that could replace, because this is dominated by the United States, right? So unless that's done, right, the U.S. will continue to serve the UN, for its own purposes and interests, and I don't know how possible it is to invoke Article 6, because that would be the end of the UN, which I'm not against. I mean, I wish, if the UN is not serving the interest of all humanity, it should.
Let me interrupt you, brother. I think you've made your point. Let me say, first of all, it would not be the end of the UN. It would be the beginning of the UN, because we haven't seen it operating as it was supposed to until now. Now, when I say supposed to, what I mean is what it said on paper. We all know that it was created as a colonizing institution. We all know that. You didn't say anything that everyone doesn't know. Believe me. We know why the United Nations was created. We know why the United States created it. We know why, for example, the United States did not join the League of Nations before that, because it would have to submit to multilateralism and consensus. And the way they rigged the United Nations from the beginning was so that they wouldn't have to do that. And that's the only reason why they joined. So we know perfectly well what their intention was. But here's the beautiful thing about it. Because of their dishonesty, because of their hypocrisy, because they can't be open about their intentions, and they have to make everyone believe that they're beautiful and democratic and wonderful and love all of these enlightened values and so forth, they had to put on paper these conditions of accountability and equality between nations, knowing perfectly well in their minds that they were never going to have to be held to account for that. They thought, because what their real belief is always, from pre-Enlightenment age to pre-modern age to Enlightenment age to modern age to post-modern age, they believe in one thing and one thing only, and that's might makes right. We know that. So they thought that they could put on paper all of these wonderful values, all of these noble principles, and they would never have to live up to it because they're strong enough that no one could ever force them to be held to account. That's the beautiful thing about it, because it's a legal document. So they put it on paper thinking that they would never be called to account for it, but they can be called to account for it. And they never thought that would happen. That's what I was saying earlier. They never thought that they would be, if they thought for a second that they would ever have to be held to account, and actually have to abide by the UN Charter, well, they never would have signed it in the first place. But they did sign it because because in their arrogance, they thought that they were going to be powerful forever. And they thought that the colonized countries would be weak and subjugated and enslaved forever, but things change. And now we have an opportunity. The world has changed, the dynamics have changed, power dynamics have changed, and the reality of America's own subjugation to their corporate elite provides us the opportunity to actually call to account the United States and invoke Article 6 and have them removed from the United Nations. And then we can see the United Nations actually operate according to the principles of the Charter, even though no one who ever established it in the first place ever thought it would have to do that. But we can make sure that it does, inshallah.